1968, John had divorced his first wife and had taken up an avant-garde artist named Yoko Ono, who would become his second wife in 1969. That was also the year that the Beatles recorded for the last time together, producing both the Let It Be and the Abbey Road albums. Although the Beatles didn't officially break up until 1970 with the actual official departure of Paul McCartney, surprisingly enough, they were pretty much done in the fall of 1969. While much of the credit or blame of the breakup was actually given to Yoko Ono, there was an equal force in Linda Eastman, who became Paul's future wife. Remember the song She Came Into the Bathroom Window? But actually, that was what Paul wrote. That was a true story when Ian and Linda met for the first time. She was a groupie who crawled through Paul's bathroom window in his hotel room. Clear evidence of the Beatles needing to go their separate ways was very apparent even before the breakup was official. By 1969, John had actually formed Plastic Ono Band and had become a full-fledged anti-war protester. Paul and Linda were already working on their first record together, and they would form the group Wings by 1971. George, too, had also begun to follow his own individual career path that would soon make him a leader in the Age of Bangladesh movement back in 1970. So John's post-Beatle life continued on a very unsteady path. He and Yoko moved to New York City in 1971. But he continued to make political enemies in the U.S. because of his anti-war stance. As such, his attempts to obtain a permanent visa were thwarted by politicians who tried to have him deported. The FBI collected information on him as well. The immigration battle was fought for 5 years until he was finally granted a permanent residency in 1976. Meanwhile, on his personal side, Yoko had suffered 3 miscarriages. An increased marital strife resulted in John and Yoko separating in 1973. Separation lasted 18 months, and Lennon referred to it as his lost weekend. During that time, Lennon's music career excelled as he completed 3 albums, but he also drank heavily. John and Yoko actually were finally reunited in January 1975, and she soon became pregnant. This time, no miscarriage, Yoko gave birth to a son on John's 35th birthday. October 9th. At this point, John experienced the most profound personal change. As he said, quote, "When Yoko and I got back together, we decided that this is our life, that having a baby was important to us, and everything else was subsidiary to that. And therefore, everything else had to be abandoned. And I mean abandoned gave us fulfillment we were looking for the space to breathe," end quote. He finally stated that he had grown up, accepted his responsibilities at the age of 35. He retired from public life, and for the next 5 years, it basically was the happiest time of his life, as he recalled. But it wasn't always easy. Quote, "For a long time, I was not listening to music, especially to that rock and roll stuff on the radio, because it would make me get sweaty. It would bring back memories I didn't want to know about, or I would get the feeling that I'm not alive because I'm just not making it. And if the music was good, I hated it, because I wasn't doing it. And if it was bad, I was furious because I could have done it better." Well, considering this recorded a disco period, can you blame him? So, feeling a new and more mature creative spirit, John returned to the studio in the summer of 1980, and he and Yoko recorded several albums worth of new music. The result was the Double Fantasy album, released in mid-November of 1980, and plans for a world tour began. But it all ended 3 weeks later, on December 8, 1980, when John was shot outside his New York home by a deranged assailant. He died on the way to the hospital. John was only 40 years old.
Living is easy with eyes closed, misunderstanding all you see. It's getting hard to be someone that it all works out. It doesn't matter much to me. Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields. Nothing is real, and nothing to get about. Strawberry fields forever.
Here it is, December of 2009. John's been gone for almost 29 years, amazingly. It's been over 40 years, 42 years, as a matter of fact, since Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, that revolutionary album. Does anyone here remember when the Beatles appeared on that solo show? Wow! there's something more. After all, to the younger generation, that being the children of the 80s and since, John Lennon has always been dead. But they still know about it. But do they know or appreciate much about, say, George Harrison, who's been dead now almost 8 years with cancer, or Paul McCartney, who still tours and creates new music in his late 60s, who, by the way, is appearing at Fenway Park in 3 days. Commercials all over the radio. That's not funny, at least kind of going back there. Do the younger generation even know who Ringo Starr is? Other than doing commercials on TV. Yeah, I know you know who Ringo Starr is. But then again, you're our kid, so you have to know who it is. So what is it about John Lennon? I believe that the answer is this, that within and beyond the music, Lennon was a teacher to those willing to listen. As John said, quote, if the Beatles from the 1960s had a message, it was this: learn to swim, and once you've learned, swim. Now, John was only a teacher, and he sent many of his messages through his music. His lessons were often the most simple ones of all. Live in peace, love one another. How many of the following Lennon song lyrics do you recognize? Love is a flower, you've got to let it grow. All you need is love. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. The love you take is equal to the love you make. War is over if you want it. All we are saying is give peace a chance. But there was another side to Lennon. The acidic and confrontational side. The side that was sick and tired of society's status quo, the inequities and the power. The side that earned him many enemies from alienating fans to the U.S. political establishment. The side that attacked fundamental norms like organized religion, national governments, and personal status. These were fights that he openly engaged, fights that he had no chance to ever prevail on his own. But there are many examples of this. A song you never hear on the radio anymore, for obvious reasons. One of his early 1970s pop songs was called Woman is the Nigger of the World. Remember that at all? Still is on his anthology. It's a good song, actually, but the language